can't do that in a garage. There's just a few places in the world with the right equipment to be able to do that.
Imagine buying a car that most people can only dream of seeing in real life. A machine worth millions, built with extreme precision, power, and prestige. Now imagine taking that same car, not just to drive it, but to rebuild it from a damaged state, sharing every step of the journey online for the world to watch. At first, it feels like a dream project. Millions of viewers follow every update. People admire the skill, the courage, and the effort it takes to bring something so rare back to life. But slowly, something changes. What started as a rebuild project turns into something much bigger than anyone expected. Instead of just being about fixing a broken hypercar, the situation begins to attract attention from places far beyond YouTube. Rumors start spreading. Discussions begin online. And suddenly, the project is no longer just a personal journey or a content series. It becomes a topic of legal concern, brand protection, and industry control. This is a point where the story of Bugatti and Mat Armstrong starts to feel different. Not because the car itself has changed, but because the meaning behind the rebuild has changed completely. Mat Armstrong is known for taking on projects that most people would never even attempt. Cars that are written off, heavily damaged, or considered impossible to restore become his challenge. His content is built around transformation, showing how something broken can be brought back to life with skill and determination. That is what made his audience grow so fast. People love watching impossible rebuilds turn into working machines again. But when a hyper-luxury car like a Bugatti enters the picture, everything becomes more complicated. This is not just another project car. This is a machine that represents one of the most powerful and exclusive automotive brands in the world. A brand like Bugatti does not just build cars for performance. It builds symbols of status, control, and identity. Every vehicle is part of a tightly controlled system. Even after a sale, the manufacturer still has a strong influence on how the car is used, repaired, and represented. As the rebuild progresses and videos go viral, the situation begins to shift. What once looked like a simple restoration starts to raise deeper questions. Can an independent builder restore a hypercar without factory approval? Should a manufacturer have control over a car even after it has been sold? And what happens when millions of people watch a rebuild that was never officially approved? These questions do not just stay within the YouTube community. They reach into the world of luxury cars, legal discussions, and industry practices. The rebuild becomes more than entertainment. It becomes a test case for ownership, control, and authority in the modern automotive world. At the center of this growing tension is a clash between two worlds. On one side is independent creativity, where builders like Mat Armstrong take risks, solve problems, and show the real process of rebuilding machines that others have given up on. On the other side is manufacturer control, where companies like Bugatti protect their brand image, engineering standards, and reputation at all costs. When these two worlds collide, the result is not simple. It is not just about bolts, engines, or repairs. It becomes about power, influence, and who has the final say over a machine that was already paid for. And as this story unfolds, it becomes clear that the rebuild is no longer just about bringing a car back to life. It is about something much larger, something that could influence how the entire luxury car world operates in the future. As the Bugatti rebuild continues, the situation starts to move into a much more serious and uncertain phase. What once looked like a simple damaged car restoration is now becoming a global talking point. Every new video released about the project attracts huge attention, not just from car fans, but also from industry experts, collectors, and people who understand the legal side of luxury ownership. The reason is simple. This is not a normal car. A Bugatti is not treated like a regular vehicle in the market. It is treated like a controlled product, even after it is sold. This means a manufacturer does not just disappear once the car leaves the showroom. Instead, it continues to protect how the car is repaired, serviced, and represented in public. And when an independent rebuild starts happening outside that system, it naturally creates tension. As more content from the rebuild spreads online, the car itself becomes more than just a machine again. It becomes a symbol. To viewers, it represents freedom, skill, and the idea that anything can be fixed with enough effort and knowledge. But to a manufacturer like Bugatti, it represents something very different. It represents a challenge to control. a challenge to the idea that only approved systems, approved technicians, and approved methods should be used when dealing with such a high-value machine. This is where the situation begins to shift from mechanical work into something more sensitive, because now it is not just about rebuilding parts or fixing damage. It is about who has authority over the identity of the car itself. At the same time, the rebuild gains more visibility, and visibility always increases pressure. Millions of people are now watching each stage of the process, analyzing every decision, every repair method, and every improvement made to the car. In the modern digital world, attention is powerful. It can turn a private project into a public debate in a very short time. And once that happens, every action starts to carry weight. A simple repair is no longer just a repair. It becomes a statement. A choice becomes a message. And a video becomes evidence in the eyes of critics and supporters alike. This growing attention also creates uncertainty around the future of the project. Questions begin to appear in discussions across social media and automotive communities. What happens if the manufacturer disagrees with the rebuild? What if parts were not approved? What if the final car cannot be registered or recognized in certain markets? These questions may not have clear answers, but they add pressure to an already sensitive situation. And as pressure builds, so does a feeling that this rebuild is no longer operating in a normal space. It is now inside a gray zone where engineering, law, reputation, and ownership all overlap. What makes this even more intense is the fact that independent rebuilders like Mat Armstrong have built their reputation on doing what others avoid. They take risks that traditional workshops would never consider. They work outside factory systems, solve problems creatively, and document everything publicly. This is exactly what makes the content so powerful. But in the case of a hyper-luxury brand, that same strength can also become a source of conflict. Because the more visible the rebuild becomes, the harder it is for any manufacturer to ignore it. And once a project reaches that level of visibility, the story is no longer just about rebuilding a car. It becomes about control, influence, and the limits of independence in a world where every action can have legal and financial consequences. As the situation develops further, the real conflict at the center of this story becomes clearer. It is no longer just about a damaged Bugatti being rebuilt in a workshop. It is about control, authority, and a long-standing system that luxury car manufacturers have built over decades. Companies like Bugatti do not only design and sell cars, they also build a controlled environment around them. This includes how the cars are serviced, who is allowed to repair them, and how they are represented in public. Every detail is carefully managed because the brand itself depends on perfection, exclusivity, and trust. When a car is worth millions, its value is not only in its performance, but also in its history, its condition, and its official approval from a manufacturer. From a manufacturer's point of view, a situation like this creates serious concern. A blacklisted or heavily damaged hypercar being rebuilt outside the official system can raise difficult questions. If the rebuild is successful and publicly visible, it may suggest that factory involvement is not always necessary. That idea alone can be powerful enough to challenge the entire structure of control. It can influence how owners think, how traders operate, and how future rebuilds are handled. Even if the rebuild is technically possible, the perception of independence can be seen as a risk to brand authority. And in the world of luxury goods, perception often matters as much as reality. This is where the tension becomes more than just technical or mechanical. It becomes reputational. Manufacturers at this level are extremely sensitive about how their products are seen in the market. A Bugatti is not just a car that performs at extreme speeds. It is a symbol of engineering excellence and exclusivity. If the public begins to believe that these cars can be fully restored or modified without official support, it can weaken the idea of control that the brand relies on. And once that perception changes, it becomes very difficult to reverse. At the same time, independent builders see the situation differently. To them, a car that has been legally purchased should be free to repair, rebuild, or modify within the limits of safety and engineering knowledge. They see their work as innovation, not disruption. They focus on solving problems that official systems often avoid, especially when a vehicle is considered too damaged or financially unviable for traditional repair routes. This difference in mindset creates a natural clash. One side prioritizes structure and control, while the other prioritizes creativity and independence. As the rebuild becomes more public, the gap between these two perspectives grows wider. Every update, every video, and every improvement to the car becomes part of a larger narrative that neither side fully controls. Supporters of the rebuild see it as proof that skill and determination can overcome limitations. Critics see it as a challenge to establish rules and brand authority. And in the middle of all this, the project itself continues moving forward, carry with it questions that go far beyond a single car. It becomes a debate about ownership rights, industry influence, and how much control a manufacturer should have once a product is sold. As the rebuild continues gaining attention, the conversation slowly shifts from engineering and brand image into something much more serious: legal pressure and the hidden rules of ownership. In most everyday situations, buying a car is simple. You pay the money, you receive the keys, and the car becomes yours to use as you wish. But in the world of hyperluxury vehicles like a Bugatti, the reality can feel more complicated. These cars are not just expensive machines. They are part of a tightly controlled ecosystem where manufacturers still hold influence even after the sale is completed. This influence does not always appear in obvious ways, but it can exist through service agreements, brand protection rules, intellectual property rights, and strict guidelines on how the car is represented or repaired. When a rebuild like this becomes public and widely viewed, it naturally draws attention to those hidden layers of control. Even if no official lawsuit is clearly confirmed, the possibility of legal action becomes part of the discussion. And in situations like this, even the idea of legal pressure can have a strong effect. It does not always need to be a full court case to create impact. Sometimes warnings, concerns, or formal objections can be enough to change behavior. For independent builders, this creates uncertainty. A project that starts as a technical challenge can suddenly feel like a legal risk, especially when the vehicle involved belongs to a brand known for protecting its image and intellectual property very aggressively. This gray zone between ownership and control is where most of the tension in this story exists. On one hand, the car is physically owned by someone outside the manufacturer. On the other hand, the brand still has an interest in how that car is used, repaired, and displayed to the public. When those two realities clash, confusion begins. Can an owner fully modify a hypercar without approval? Can a rebuild affect the legal status of the vehicle? And if something goes wrong, who is responsible? These questions do not always have clear answers, especially when different countries have different laws regarding vehicle modification, intellectual property, and brand representation. For creators like Mat Armstrong, this situation adds another layer of complexity. Their work depends on transparency, documentation, and public storytelling. Every step of the rebuild is shared with an audience, which increases both visibility and accountability. While this openness is part of what makes the content successful, it also means that every decision becomes visible to not just fans, but also critics, experts, and potentially even legal teams. In this environment, a simple repair choice can take on a much larger meaning. It can be interpreted as a statement about independence, authority, or even challenge to established systems. As a result, the rebuild no longer exists in a normal space where only engineering matters. It now sits at the intersection of law, reputation, and industry control. This is what makes the situation so unusual and so widely discussed. It is not just about fixing a rare car anymore. It is about understanding where the line is drawn between ownership and permission, between creativity and regulation, and between freedom and control in the modern automotive world. And as this pressure builds, the story continues to evolve in a way that no one involved can fully predict or fully control. As this rebuild continues to gain attention, its impact starts to reach far beyond just one car, one builder, or even one brand. The situation begins to influence how people think about the entire hypercar industry. These types of vehicles exist in a very unique space, where value is not only determined by performance, but also by exclusivity, brand trust, and strict manufacturer control. Unlike regular cars, hypercars are often treated as collectible assets, where every detail of their history matters. A single repair, modification, or undocumented change can affect their long-term value significantly. This is why manufacturers invest so much effort into controlling how their cars are maintained and presented, even after they are sold. When a high-profile independent rebuild becomes public, it naturally attracts attention from across the industry. not just from fans, but from collectors, traders, insurers, and even competing manufacturers. Everyone starts watching closely because the outcome of such a situation could influence future behavior in the market. If a damaged hypercar can be successfully rebuilt outside the official system and still function properly, it raises important questions about dependency on manufacturers. It also challenges the idea that only authorized service networks should be trusted with these machines. This does not necessarily mean that factory standards are wrong, but it does open a debate about whether they're the only valid option. For collectors and investors, this creates uncertainty. Hypercars are often seen as long-term assets, sometimes even as investments. Their value depends heavily on trust in the brand, official service history, and recognized repair standards. If independent rebuilds become more common or more accepted, it could change how value is calculated in this market. Some may see it as a positive development, offering more flexibility and freedom for owners. Others may see it as a risk, potentially weakening the exclusivity that makes these vehicles so desirable in the first place. This tension between freedom and control is what makes the situation so important for the industry as a whole. At the same time, insurance companies and financial institutions also take notice of situations like this. When a vehicle is rebuilt outside official channels, questions arise about risk assessment, coverage eligibility, and long-term reliability. These are not simple issues. They affect how cars are insured, how loans are structured, and how ownership is transferred in high-value markets. Even small changes in perception can influence policy decisions. That is why events like this rebuild are not treated as isolated incidents. Instead, they are studied carefully as potential indicators of future trends in the automotive world. Because of all these factors, the story stops being just about a single Bugatti or a single creator. It becomes part of a larger conversation about how the hypercar industry will evolve in the future. Will manufacturers continue to maintain strict control over repairs and branding? Or will independent builders and content creators slowly change the expectations of ownership? These are questions that do not have immediate answers, but they're becoming more relevant as digital documentation, online audiences, and independent engineering projects grow in influence. And as this rebuild continues, it stands at the center of that changing landscape, quietly shaping a debate that could define the next era of hypercar ownership and control. As the story reaches its most intense phase, the rebuild is no longer just a technical project, and it is no longer even just a legal discussion. It has now become a symbol of a much larger shift happening in the modern automotive world. At the heart of this shift is a simple but powerful question. What does ownership really mean in an age where technology, branding, and legal control are so deeply connected? For decades, people believe that once you buy something, especially something as expensive as a car, it fully belongs to you. You can repair it, modify it, or rebuild it as you choose. But in the world of hypercars, that idea becomes less clear. These vehicles are not just machines. They are part of the system where manufacturers, service networks, and brand identity all continue to play a role long after the sale is completed. This is why the Bugatti rebuild situation feels so significant to many observers. It represents a point where traditional ideas of ownership are being tested in real time. On one side, there is a belief in full independence, where skilled builders and owners should have the freedom to restore and modify their vehicles without needing approval from the original manufacturer. On the other side, there is a belief in structured control, where the manufacturer has a responsibility to protect the integrity, safety, and reputation of its products, even after they leave the factory. Neither side is completely right or wrong, but the tension between them is growing as more high-value vehicles enter the hands of independent creators who document everything publicly. What makes this situation even more powerful is the visibility of it all. In the past, a rebuild like this might have happened quietly, in a private workshop, away from public attention. But now, with millions of viewers watching every update online, the impact is much larger. Every decision becomes part of a global conversation. Every repair step becomes a point of debate. And every legal concern becomes amplified through social media discussions. This level of visibility changes the nature of the project itself. It is no longer just about fixing a car. It is about shaping perception, influencing opinion, and possibly even affecting industry behavior. As pressure builds, the uncertainty around the future of such projects also increases. If manufacturers choose to enforce stricter rules or take legal action in similar cases, it could discourage independent rebuilds altogether. On the other hand, if these projects continue without major resistance, it could gradually shift how the industry views ownership and modification rights. Either outcome would have long-term consequences for collectors, builders, and even manufacturers themselves. This is why so many people inside and outside the automotive world are paying attention. The outcome of this single situation could influence policies, attitudes, and expectations for years to come. In the end, the story is not just about a Bugatti, and it is not just about Mat Armstrong. It is about the balance between creativity and control, between independence and regulation, and between personal ownership and corporate influence. It shows how modern technology and global visibility can turn a single rebuild into a worldwide debate. And as the situation continues to unfold, one thing becomes clear. The line between what you own and what you're allowed to do with it may not be as simple as it once seemed. As this entire situation continues to unfold, it slowly becomes clear that the Bugatti rebuild is not just an isolated case or a simple clash between a car manufacturer and an independent builder. Instead, it represents a much deeper warning about how modern ownership, technology, and branding are evolving together. In the past, car ownership was straightforward. A buyer purchased a vehicle, and that vehicle became fully theirs. They could repair it, modify it, or even completely rebuild it without needing approval from anyone else. But in today's world of hypercars, luxury branding, and digital visibility, that simple idea is becoming more complicated. Ownership now exists inside a network of rules, expectations, and unseen influences that can still affect how a product is used long after it has been sold. This is what makes the story so powerful and also so unsettling for many people who follow it. On the surface, it looks like just another exciting rebuild project shared online. But underneath, it raises serious questions about control, independence, and the future high-value assets. If manufacturers continue to maintain strong influence over how their products are repaired and represented, then ownership may slowly start to feel less like full control and more like permission-based usage. On the other hand, if independent builders continue to push boundaries and successfully complete projects outside official systems, it